Beneath the tailored suits and slick back hair was a man with ice in his veins and ambition carved in stone. John Gotti didn't just want to be a mob boss. He wanted to be a king. And in his kingdom, loyalty was currency, power was everything, and brutality was simply part of doing business. But before Gotti rose to rule the Gambino family, he had to deal with the man sitting at the top, Paul Castellano. Castellano, often seen more as a businessman than a street-tough gangster, ran the family like a CEO. That style clashed with Gotti's hands-on, blue-collar mindset. Tensions began to simmer when Gotti felt shortchanged, literally. He believed Castellano was pocketing too much from Gotti's hijacking operations at JFK Airport. It wasn't just greed that infuriated Gotti, it was disrespect. Then came the whispers. Rumors started swirling that Gotti was dabbling in heroin trafficking, an unforgivable sin in Castellano's rulebook. Paul had made it clear. Anyone dealing heroin would face death. But Gotti was already too deep. In 1983, the pressure hit a boiling point when Gotti's brother, Gene, and his close ally, Angelo Ruggiero, were caught moving heroin. The FBI's wiretaps captured damning conversations, and Castellano demanded to hear the tapes. Ruggiero refused. Suddenly, Castellano had Gotti cornered, and he made a threat. He would demote Gotti, strip him of his power, and exile him from the criminal empire he was trying to build. But John Gotti didn't take kindly to threats. Not from anyone, especially not from Castellano. By 1984, Castellano's reign was crumbling. The boss had been indicted under the RICO Act in connection to Roy DeMeo's violent crew. In 1985, another indictment dropped and paranoia set in. Castellano grew distant from the streets and deeper into his fortress in Staten Island, trusting only a tight circle. Gotti watched closely and saw opportunity. When Castellano began appointing acting bosses to run operations in his absence, Gotti was left out. That was all the confirmation he needed. Castellano no longer trusted him. The feud had reached its boiling point. So Gotti did what mobsters rarely dared. He conspired to kill the boss. Quietly, he assembled a team of trusted men who also felt Castellano was weakening the family. They called themselves the Fist, Frank DeCicco, Joe Piney Armone, Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Robert DiBernardo. They weren't just angry, they were ready to act. Then on December 2nd, 1985, a turning point arrived. Aniello Dellacroce, Gotti's longtime mentor and the family's underboss, died of cancer. Gotti expected Castellano to pay his respects. He didn't. Not only did Castellano skip the wake, but within days, he elevated his driver, Thomas Bellotti, to the role of underboss, a move that many saw as pure insult. Castellano had dismissed tradition and loyalty in one swift move. Gotti's mind was made up. Castellano had to go. The plan was set in motion. On December 16, 1985, word came that Castellano would be dining at Spark Steakhouse in Manhattan. Gotti waited in a car nearby, watching the entrance. At exactly 5:26 p.m., Castellano stepped out of his black Lincoln with Bellotti at his side. In a flash, gunmen disguised in trench coats approached and opened fire. Castellano dropped to the sidewalk, riddled with bullets. Bellotti tried to escape, but it was over in seconds. No one tried to hide their involvement. This wasn't just a hit, it was a coup. With Castellano dead, Gotti became boss in everything but name. And just like that, the most feared man in organized crime had seized the throne in broad daylight.
Once he wore the crown, Gotti wasted no time remaking the family in his image. Ruthless, sharp, and always dressed to impress, he promoted those who had stood by him. Chief among them was Sammy the Bull Gravano, who became consigliere and Gotti's right hand. Sammy didn't just offer loyalty, he delivered violence. Under Gotti's orders, he personally oversaw or carried out at least 19 murders. Together, they eliminated threats, solidified their rule, and made the Gambinos the most powerful crime family in America. But power comes at a price. In April 1986, Frank DeCicco, Gotti's trusted ally, was blown to pieces by a car bomb outside a Brooklyn social club. It was retaliation for Castellano's murder, orchestrated by the Lucchese family. DeCicco had been the real target that day, but everyone knew. The bomb had Gotti's name on it. He had narrowly escaped death. By now, Gotti was no longer just a mob boss. He was a celebrity. He strutted down the streets of New York with swagger, his designer suits gleaming in the sun, flanked by bodyguards. The press dubbed him the Teflon Don after he beat multiple criminal charges, each time walking away clean. Jurors were either intimidated or bribed, and witnesses miraculously forgot what they saw. Gotti's aura was untouchable, but the FBI was watching, and they weren't giving up. In December 1990, the feds raided the Rave Night Social Club, Gotti's headquarters in Little Italy, and arrested both Gotti and Sammy Gravano on racketeering charges. The government had been bugging the club for months, collecting hours of damning conversations. But Gotti had a plan. He would blame everything, every murder, every order, on Sammy. Let the underboss take the fall. When the FBI played the tapes for Gravano, everything changed. On those tapes, Gotti was heard coldly discussing murders and belittling Sammy. The betrayal was too much. In a stunning move, Sammy flipped. He became the highest-ranking mobster ever to testify against his own boss. In court, Gravano confessed to 19 murders and implicated Gotti in nearly all of them. The fallout was catastrophic. Nearly 40 mobsters were indicted based on Gravano's testimony. The myth of the Teflon Don shattered in a federal courtroom. In April 1992, John Gotti was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. From a street thug in Queens to the most powerful mob boss in America, Gotti's rise was as dramatic as his fall. His ambition had no limits. His wrath had no mercy. And in the end, it wasn't bullets or betrayal on the streets that brought him down. It was a voice behind a closed door and the loyalty of a friend that cracked under pressure. And this was just the beginning. No one wore the mob crown with more swagger than John Gotti. He ruled the Gambino crime family with charm, calculation, and cold-blooded ruthlessness. But behind the flash of silk suits and media headlines was a man spiraling deeper into paranoia, surrounded by betrayal and hell-bent on staying in power, even if it meant destroying the very empire he had built. The fall of John Gotti wasn't just a collapse of one man's kingdom. It marked the twilight of the American Mafia's golden age. In 1986, Gotti had just solidified his rule. But like all empires built on blood and betrayal, his grip on power was fragile. That year, a seemingly minor assault case started to show cracks in his image. Romuald Pisic, a truck driver, had accused Gotti of assault. But when the case finally went to trial, Pisic suddenly forgot who attacked him. In the courtroom, he mumbled vague answers and claimed he couldn't remember a thing. The jury was stunned. So were the prosecutors. It didn't take a genius to see what had happened. Someone got to the witness. Someone made sure that Teflon Don would once again walk away untouched. But just days after that courtroom victory, Gotti's world nearly exploded, literally. On April 13, 1986, his underboss Frank DeCicco was killed in a car bomb outside a Brooklyn social club. The target had been Gotti, but a last-minute change in plans meant DeCicco took the hit instead. The Lucchese family had struck back for Castellano's murder. It was a brutal reminder that Gotti's enemies hadn't forgotten, and they never forgave. Even from behind bars, Gotti didn't slow down. While briefly locked up during this volatile time, he orchestrated the murder of Robert DiBernardo, one of his own allies. The reason? Power. After DeCicco's death, the hierarchy within the Gambino family was shaky. Gotti wanted absolute control. DiBernardo, once part of the fist that helped Gotti rise, was now seen as a rival. A single word from Gotti sealed his fate. DiBernardo was taken out without hesitation. As his reach stretched deeper, Gotti realized he needed people around him he could control. Angelo Ruggiero, once a close confidant, had become a liability. His courtroom outbursts and sloppy behavior made him an embarrassment. Gotti pushed him aside. Joe Piney Armone, known for his loyalty and calm, was promoted to underboss. The machine kept moving, but not without consequences. In late 1986, the government launched a major racketeering trial against Gotti and his inner circle. The charges were serious. The courtroom was fortified. The evidence was strong. But Gotti had one more trick up his sleeve: control the jury. And that's exactly what happened. Juror George Pape, sitting quietly among 11 others, had already been bought. For a price of $60,000, Pape agreed to vote not guilty. no matter what evidence was presented. The result? On March 13, 1987, John Gotti was acquitted on all counts. The courtroom erupted in disbelief. The press once again labeled him the Teflon Don. Nothing could stick, but the truth eventually surfaced. In 1992, Pape was convicted of obstruction of justice. He admitted to selling his vote and was sentenced to 3 years. By then, though the damage had been done, Gotti had walked free once again with the world watching. Yet while the public saw a charming, untouchable crime boss inside the Gambino family, things were falling apart. Between 1986 and 1987, two of Gotti's most trusted men, Joe Piney Armone and Consigliere Joe Gallo, were both convicted. They were replaced, but the void in leadership was becoming harder to fill. Then came the long-running heroin case against Gene Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero. 2 trials, 2 mistrials. Once again, jury tampering was suspected. Gotti was playing chess, not checkers. But the walls were closing in. By 1989, Ruggiero was dying of cancer, and in a stunning twist of cold pragmatism, Gotti started to distance himself. The man he once called a brother had become expendable. Gotti even considered having him killed, afraid that desperation or resentment might lead Ruggiero to cooperate with authorities. Ultimately, he let him die alone, cut off from the family he once served. Paranoia became Gotti's constant companion. By January 1988, he had made the Rave Night Social Club in Little Italy his new command center. Despite warnings from his own people that the FBI might be listening, Gotti met there regularly, every week, holding court as if he were invincible. He laughed, he bragged, and most fatally he talked. Too much. The FBI, always watching, bugged the club with hidden microphones. They captured dozens of conversations, mob business, murders, betrayals, names. Gotti had become his own worst enemy. His hunger for attention had created a trail of evidence he couldn't erase. In 1989, a critical moment arrived. Fred Weiss, a former Staten Island businessman, was rumored to be cooperating with federal investigators. Gotti panicked. He couldn't afford another rat. So he sent a message. But instead of using Gambino men directly, Gotti contracted the hit out to the DeCavalcante family of New Jersey, keeping his own hands clean, at least in theory. Weiss was gunned down outside his girlfriend's house. To Gotti, it was just another loose end tied up. To the FBI, it was more blood on his hands. By now, Gotti's empire was more about fear than respect. He demanded total loyalty and punished betrayal with unrelenting brutality. Anyone who questioned his judgment, anyone who hesitated, was removed. The Gambino family was no longer a brotherhood, it was a dictatorship. In a move that shocked even longtime members, Gotti decided it was time to pass on the legacy. On December 24, 1988, he initiated his own son, John Gotti Jr., into the Gambino family. To avoid accusations of nepotism, Gotti had Gravano perform the ceremony. But the message was clear. This was now a dynasty. Within months, Gotti Jr. was promoted to capo regime, and by 1998, with his father imprisoned, he was believed to be acting boss. But the new prince wasn't ready for the weight of the crown. Gotti Jr. soon came under fire. Prosecutors accused him of extorting over $1 million from the famed Scores nightclub in Manhattan over 6 years. Tapes surfaced from prison, revealing phone calls between father and son. Gotti Sr. giving advice, Gotti Jr. seeking direction. The lines between business and family had blurred beyond recognition. Then, in a moment that shattered the illusion of family unity, Gotti Jr. pleaded guilty in 1999. He admitted to racketeering, extortion, and bribery against his father's advice. When his mother learned the full extent of his involvement, the betrayal cut deep. The house of Gotti was collapsing from the inside. And all the while, John Gotti Sr. sat in a cell in Marion, Illinois, isolated, defiant, and alone. He never flipped, never cooperated, never cut a deal. To the end, he clung to the code of omerta, even as the walls crumbled around him. But the cancer was eating him alive. For years, he refused treatment. His once powerful frame withered. The man who once ruled New York's underworld with an iron fist now shuffled through prison hallways, unseen and mostly forgotten. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti died in a federal prison hospital. There are no limousines, no screaming fans, no bodyguards at his side, just silence. With his death came the end of an era. The Gambino family, once the crown jewel of the American Mafia, fell into disarray. The FBI cracked down on the 5 families like never before. The code had been broken, the secrets had been exposed, and the myth of the untouchable mob boss buried alongside the Teflon Don. John Gotti's story is not just about power, it's about the price of keeping it. He climbed the ranks through force, outmaneuvered his enemies with charm, and ruled with fear. But in the end, it was his pride, his paranoia, and his need for control that destroyed everything he built. What does Gotti's legacy really teach us? Is it a warning about the seductive nature of power? Or a cautionary tale about loyalty in a world where betrayal is only a heartbeat away? If you found this deep dive into John Gotti's brutal empire eye-opening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This is Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans, where we expose the darkness behind the legends. And let us know in the comments, was Gotti a visionary mob boss, or just another tyrant who flew too close to the sun?
In the labyrinthine streets of Little Italy, where the scent of garlic and oregano mingles with whispered secrets, a legend was born on March 15, 1914. At 232 Mulberry Street, in a tenement building that had witnessed countless immigrant dreams, Aniello Dellacroce entered a world that would shape him into one of organized crime's most feared and respected figures. But this wasn't just another gangster's tale. This was the story of a man whose very appearance would defy every stereotype of what a mafioso should look like, earning him a nickname that would both puzzle and intimidate his enemies. Aniello Dellacroce was not your typical mobster, and it showed from the moment he was born. While his neighbors bore the olive complexions and dark features typical of southern Italian immigrants, young Aniello possessed fair skin, medium brown hair that would turn prematurely white, and piercing light blue eyes that seemed to see straight through a person's soul. These striking features, so unlike his Mediterranean contemporaries, would eventually earn him the peculiar moniker, the Pollock, a nickname that spoke to how dramatically he stood apart from the crowd, even in appearance. Growing up in the heart of Little Italy wasn't just about learning the old country's traditions, it was about understanding the unwritten rules of the street. The Dellacroce household wasn't immune to these influences. Young Aniello shared his formative years with his brother Carmine, who would later become entangled in the same underworld that would consume their family. But while many Italian-American families of the era struggled to keep their children away from the allure of easy money and street respect, the Dellacroce boys seemed drawn to it like moths to a flame. The transformation from neighborhood kid to made man didn't happen overnight. In the late 1930s, as America teetered on the brink of war and the Great Depression still cast its long shadow over working-class families, Aniello made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He joined the Mangano crime family, one of New York's most powerful criminal organizations. This wasn't a casual association or a temporary alliance. This was a blood oath that would bind him to a life of violence, loyalty, and uncompromising silence. By the early 1940s, as American soldiers were fighting fascism overseas, Dellacroce was fighting his own battles on the streets of New York. His official induction as a made soldier came during these turbulent years, marking his formal entry into a brotherhood that valued omerta above all else. But becoming a soldier was just the beginning. It was like earning the right to audition for a role in a deadly play where improvisation could mean the difference between life and death. The year 1951 brought seismic changes to the criminal landscape that would forever alter Dellacroce's trajectory. Vincent Mangano, the family's namesake boss, mysteriously disappeared, the kind of disappearance that in mob circles usually involved cement shoes and deep water. In the power vacuum that followed, Albert Anastasia, known throughout the underworld as the Mad Hatter for his unpredictable violence, emerged as the new leader. For Dellacroce, this transition represented opportunity wrapped in danger. Working under Anastasia was like dancing with dynamite. The man was notorious for his hair-trigger temper and his willingness to eliminate anyone he perceived as a threat. Yet for Dellacroce, this mentorship proved invaluable. Under Anastasia's tutelage, he learned the delicate art of intimidation, the calculated use of violence, and perhaps most importantly, how to command respect through presence alone. Those piercing blue eyes that had made him stand out as a child now became weapons of psychological warfare. The 1950s and 60s witnessed Dellacroce's meteoric rise through the organization's ranks. His elevation to capo of the prestigious Mulberry Street crew wasn't just a promotion. It was recognition of his unique combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and unwavering loyalty. The Mulberry Street crew operated from the very neighborhood where he was born, creating a poetic symmetry that wasn't lost on those who understood the importance of territory in organized crime. As a capo, Dellacroce commanded respect that extended far beyond his immediate crew. His reputation as an enforcer grew with each successful operation, each problem solved with clinical efficiency. But what truly set him apart wasn't just his capacity for violence. It was his ability to inspire absolute loyalty in his subordinates while maintaining the kind of discipline that other families envied. October 25, 1957, marked another pivotal moment in both Dellacroce's career and the history of organized crime. Albert Anastasia, the man who had been his mentor and protector, was gunned down in the barbershop of the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. The assassination, carried out with military precision, sent shockwaves through the underworld and created another power vacuum that ambitious men were eager to fill. In the aftermath of Anastasia's murder, Carlo Gambino emerged as the new boss of what would soon be renamed the Gambino crime family. For Dellacroce, this transition presented a crucial test of his political acumen. Despite his deep loyalty to Anastasia, he demonstrated the kind of pragmatic flexibility that separated successful criminals from dead ones. Rather than resist Gambino's ascension or seek revenge for his fallen mentor, Dellacroce chose to support the new regime. This decision proved to be a masterstroke of strategic thinking. Gambino, recognizing both Dellacroce's value and the potential threat he could pose, elevated him to the position of underboss, replacing Joseph Biondo. The appointment wasn't just a reward for loyalty, it was a calculated move to keep a dangerous man close while utilizing his considerable talents for the family's benefit. The role of underboss in a major crime family isn't ceremonial. It's the difference between chaos and order, between a loosely affiliated group of criminals and a disciplined military organization. For nearly 3 decades, Dellacroce would hold this position, becoming the iron fist in Gambino's velvet glove. His reputation for strict discipline and unwavering control over street operations became legendary throughout the 5 families of New York. What made Dellacroce particularly effective wasn't just his willingness to use violence, it was his restraint in its application. His cold demeanor and intimidating presence meant that often, a single stare from those pale blue eyes was enough to resolve disputes that might otherwise require bloodshed. Associates spoke in hushed tones about his ice-cold stare, a look that could freeze the most hardened criminals in their tracks. The Rave Night Social Club at 247 Mulberry Street became more than just Dellacroce's base of operations. It became a symbol of his power. Located in the heart of Little Italy, just blocks from where he was born, the club served as both fortress and court. Here, disputes were settled, plans were made, and the business of organized crime was conducted with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 corporation. But Dellacroce's influence extended far beyond the walls of the Rave Night. His crew, known simply as the Mulberry Street Crew, became one of the most feared and respected factions within the Gambino family. The men who served under him weren't just criminals. They were carefully selected individuals who shared his code of silence and his commitment to the organization above all else. However, even the most carefully constructed criminal empire eventually faces the one enemy it cannot intimidate, bribe, or eliminate: the relentless pursuit of federal law enforcement. For Dellacroce, the game of cat and mouse with authorities had begun decades earlier, creating a pattern that would define his entire adult life and ultimately contribute to his downfall. The first crack in young Aniello's armor appeared in 1930, when he was just 16 years old. A store burglary charge resulted in 2.5 years at Elmira Reformatory, a harsh introduction to the criminal justice system that might have deterred a different kind of young man. But for Dellacroce, prison became a graduate school in criminal methodology, where connections were forged and reputations were built behind bars. The arrest that followed painted a portrait of a man who lived perpetually on the edge of legal scrutiny. In 1934, a disorderly conduct charge. In 1937, felonious assault earning him 6 months behind bars. By 1956, the charges had evolved to match his rising status: vagrancy, criminal association, and weapon possession. Each arrest was like a chess move in an elaborate game between Dellacroce and federal authorities, with both sides constantly adapting their strategies. The 1956 arrest outside the Rave Night Club revealed the FBI's growing awareness of Dellacroce's importance within the organization. Caught with 2 associates and charged with vagrancy and illegal weapon possession, the incident demonstrated how closely federal agents were monitoring his activities. But more importantly, it showed that even routine surveillance could yield significant intelligence about the inner workings of organized crime. 10 years later, in 1966, Dellacroce found himself at the center of what law enforcement dubbed the Little Appalachian Meeting, a reference to the infamous 1957 gathering that had exposed the existence of organized crime's National Commission. This Queen's meeting brought together bosses from multiple families across the United States, representing a rare opportunity for federal agents to observe the Mafia's highest echelons in action. When the dust settled, Dellacroce and numerous other high-ranking criminals found themselves facing conspiracy charges and contempt citations for their steadfast refusal to cooperate with grand jury investigations. The message was clear: the federal government was no longer content to prosecute street-level crimes. They were now targeting the organizational structure itself, seeking to understand and ultimately dismantle the very foundations of organized crime. The 1972 income tax evasion case marked a turning point in both Dellacroce's criminal career and federal prosecution strategy. The charges stemmed from his failure to report extorted stock in Yankee Plastics, a relatively minor financial crime that carried major symbolic weight. The sentencing judge didn't mince words, labeling Dellacroce a parasite and danger to society while imposing a 5-year federal prison sentence. But it was the events of 1979 that truly demonstrated the deadly serious nature of Dellacroce's world. Charles Calise, suspected of being a federal informant, was found murdered in a symbolic Mafia-style execution that sent chills through both law enforcement and criminal circles. The message was unmistakable: cooperation with authorities carried the ultimate penalty. Dellacroce and Tony Plate found themselves indicted for murder and racketeering in connection with Calise's death. The case took a sinister turn when Plate mysteriously vanished, the kind of disappearance that in organized crime circles usually means a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Dellacroce, however, was ultimately acquitted, adding another layer to his reputation for both ruthlessness and legal invincibility. The 1980s brought an escalation in federal pressure that would have crushed a lesser criminal organization. Dellacroce faced indictment for grand jury contempt in connection with the assassination of Carmine Galante, the Bonanno family boss whose murder had shocked even hardened criminals with its brazen execution in a Brooklyn restaurant. The web of investigations was tightening, connecting Dellacroce to some of the most high-profile murders in organized crime history. By 1985, the federal government had assembled what they believed to be an airtight case against the aging underboss. Multiple RICO indictments charged him with extortion, gambling, murder, loan sharking, and a litany of other crimes that represented decades of criminal activity. More significantly, he was indicted as a member of the Commission, the governing body of organized crime, for racketeering activities that spanned the entire northeastern United States. But fate had other plans for Aniello Dellacroce. As federal prosecutors prepared for what promised to be the trial of the century, their primary defendant was fighting a different kind of battle entirely. Cancer and heart disease were ravaging his body, transforming the once intimidating figure into a shadow of his former self. The man whose ice-cold stare had once frozen hardened criminals in their tracks was now struggling with the most basic functions of daily life. December 1985 brought the end of an era. At Mary Immaculate Hospital in Queens, New York, Aniello Dellacroce died at age 71, taking with him decades of secrets that federal investigators desperately wanted to uncover. His death meant that he would never face trial on the 3 serious federal indictments pending against him, a final victory in his lifelong war against the authorities who had pursued him for over 5 decades. The power vacuum created by Dellacroce's death sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld that are still felt today. Just 2 weeks after his funeral, John Gotti, a rising star within Dellacroce's own crew, orchestrated the assassination of boss Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. This brazen murder in the heart of Midtown Manhattan marked the beginning of a new, more flamboyant era for the Gambino family under Gotti's leadership. But perhaps the most tragic consequence of Dellacroce's criminal legacy was its impact on his own family. His son Armand had been indicted in the same 1985 RICO case that threatened to imprison his father for life. When faced with the prospect of lengthy federal imprisonment, Armand chose to flee rather than face justice. The stress and pressure of life as a fugitive proved too much for the younger Dellacroce. At just 32 years old, he died from a cerebral hemorrhage while in hiding, a victim of the same criminal world that had elevated his father to legendary status. The story of Aniello Dellacroce represents more than just the biography of a single criminal. It's a window into the evolution of organized crime in America, the development of federal law enforcement tactics, and the ultimate price paid by those who choose a life outside the law. His legacy continues to influence both criminal organizations and law enforcement strategies to this day. From his birth on Mulberry Street to his death in a Queens hospital bed, Dellacroce's life spanned nearly the entire golden age of American organized crime. He witnessed the transformation of small neighborhood gangs into sophisticated criminal enterprises, the development of federal law enforcement from local police work to complex racketeering investigations, and the ultimate decline of the very organization he had served with unwavering loyalty. The pale blue eyes that had once struck fear into the hearts of enemies and inspired loyalty in associates were finally closed, but the legend of the Pollock lives on. His story serves as both a cautionary tale about the inevitable consequences of criminal life and a fascinating glimpse into a world that most people can only imagine through movies and television shows. If you've been captivated by the rise and fall of Aniello Dellacroce, then you've only scratched the surface of organized crime's most compelling stories. Subscribe to Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans for more deep dives into the lives of the men and women who built criminal empires, challenged federal authorities, and ultimately paid the price for their choices. From the boardrooms of legitimate business to the back rooms of social clubs, we'll continue exploring the hidden history that shaped America's criminal landscape. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the secrets that powerful people thought would never see the light of day. Heath Ledger's haunting portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight left audiences worldwide unsettled. His twisted grin burned into our collective memory. The scars stretching from the corners of his mouth to his ears weren't just makeup. They symbolized something far more disturbing. Now, with Joaquin Phoenix's character returning in Todd Phillips' sequel to Joker, that same ghastly smile resurfaces in pop culture, reigniting an eerie fascination. What is it about this grotesque grin that holds us captive? The answer lies deeper than Hollywood storytelling. That exaggerated, permanent smile, infamously known as the Glasgow smile, is more than just a visual horror. It's a scar of real violence, a cruel signature born from the underbelly of society. Technically, it's a mutilation inflicted by slicing the corners of the mouth up toward the ears, using blades, razors, or even shards of glass. But it's not just the physical wound, it's the psychological devastation, the visible stamp of domination and retribution. Victims are often beaten to force a scream, tearing the wound further, ensuring not just pain but a lifelong mark of shame. Yet behind the gruesome act lies a deeper story, one of poverty, gang warfare, and the human capacity for cruelty under social pressure. The Glasgow smile didn't emerge in a vacuum. It was forged in a crucible of industrial grime and urban decay, a brutal reflection of the darker currents coursing through history. It's a phenomenon rooted in desperation and fear, stretching across borders and time periods, still evoking both fascination and horror today. To understand its origins, we must journey back to 19th century Glasgow. Between 1830 and 1880, the city's population more than doubled as people fled the countryside in search of work. Glasgow promised opportunity with booming factory jobs and shipyard labor. But for many, that dream curdled into a nightmare. Overcrowded tenements, overflowing with the poor, turned into breeding grounds for disease and misery. The smoke-choked air, the stench of sewage, the cries of the malnourished, these were the daily realities for the working class. Social services were nearly non-existent, and the police were overwhelmed. Amid this chaos, crime found fertile ground. Following World War I, the trauma of returning soldiers and an economy in disarray only exacerbated the situation. Violence became commonplace, and out of the crumbling tenement blocks, organized crime began to rise. By the 1920s and 30s, Glasgow was notorious for its razor gangs, men who claimed territory not with guns, but with the threat of slashing steel. These weren't just street thugs. They were criminal networks operating protection rackets, settling scores, and asserting dominance with a flick of a blade. In these violent streets, the Glasgow smile emerged as both punishment and warning. It was a tool of psychological warfare. Rival gangs, debtors, or anyone who dared cross the line could end up with that permanent reminder, disfigured not just for vengeance, but to serve as a public example. And the divisions that fueled the violence were not merely territorial. They were tribal, religious, and deeply personal. The Protestant Billy Boys and the Catholic Norman Conks turned Glasgow into a battlefield of faith and identity. Gang allegiance was tied to one's community, beliefs, and very sense of self. A fight wasn't just a clash over turf, it was a defense of honor, of tradition, of who you were. And the violence escalated accordingly. Razors became the preferred weapon, not just for their effectiveness but for their symbolism. A blade could humiliate in a way a bullet never could. Retaliation was endless. One smile begot another. Fights turned to mutilations. Beatings were calculated, designed to induce screams, so the victim's own agony would deepen the cut. The Glasgow smile wasn't just inflicted, it was orchestrated, ritualized. Once carved, there was no hiding it. The scar told a story, a tale of betrayal, of weakness, or simply of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But even brutality has its limits, and by the late 1930s, the city had had enough. With Glasgow's reputation suffering, police campaigns led by figures like Percy Solido cracked down hard. High-profile gang leaders were jailed, and a slow process of reform began. Although the streets grew quieter, the violence didn't disappear, it evolved. As the brutality in Glasgow waned, it re-emerged in other corners of Britain. The 1930s and 40s saw the rise of the Brighton razor gangs, operating around racecourses and gambling dens. Their crimes were less tribal and more opportunistic: extortion, racketeering, and illegal betting. Razor violence wasn't about identity anymore, it was business. The Glasgow smile became less a marker of gang pride and more a calling card of organized crime. By the 1970s, it had found new life among English football hooligans. In the shadowy underworld of the Chelsea headhunters, the term Chelsea grin entered the lexicon. Here, violence took on yet another form, tribalism not of religion or community, but of sport. Rival fans, or even members seen as traitors, were targets. The mutilation persisted not just as punishment, but as proof of allegiance, a badge of savagery in the name of team loyalty. The grin spread, adapting to its surroundings like a viral idea. No longer bound to Glasgow's past, it now belonged to any culture that used fear as control. Across continents and decades, it morphed from gang emblem to method of terror. History provided chilling examples. William Joyce, better known as Lord Haw-Haw, bore a facial scar allegedly from an attack during a Conservative Party meeting in the 1920s. Some say it was the work of Jewish communists. Others claim his wife inflicted it during a drunken brawl. Regardless, the scar gave his fascist persona a sinister edge. It helped the Allies identify him before his execution for treason. Even scars, it seems, tell stories beyond their origins. In 1927, the acclaimed Mexican composer Agustin Lara was attacked with a broken bottle during an altercation with a showgirl. The left side of his face bore the mark forever. Rather than ruin his career, it fed his mystique, proof of the pain behind his romantic ballads. But the darkest chapters belong to figures like Albert Fish. A sadistic serial killer dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, Fish murdered and cannibalized children in the early 20th century. Some victims bore slashes from ear to ear, an echo of the Glasgow smile, driven not by gang rules but by depraved compulsion. Then there was Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. Found mutilated in 1947 Los Angeles, her mouth was grotesquely carved from corner to ear, echoing the same cruel method. The brutality of her unsolved murder remains one of America's most infamous cases, her smile forever frozen in nightmare. And even in more recent decades, the horror persists. In 1968, 9-year-old Lee Sun-baek became a victim of North Korean commandos, his face slashed in a brutal political act. In 2018, a British man in Marbella was attacked by a criminal gang, his face carved as part of a ruthless retribution. The Glasgow smile, rebranded, relocated, remains a chilling symbol of power, punishment, and control. What began in the alleys of industrial Glasgow has transcended its birthplace. It is not just an act of violence, but a ritual, a message, a grim legacy etched in flesh. And this is only the beginning. Few Hollywood faces carry real scars that speak louder than their performances. Tommy Flanagan do. Long before his role as the sharp-edged Chips in Sons of Anarchy, Flanagan was just a young Glasgow DJ trying to make it through the night. One evening changed everything. Attacked outside a club by gang members, his face was brutally slashed from ear to ear. He became a real-world victim of the infamous Glasgow smile. Instead of hiding the disfigurement, Flanagan transformed it into a defining feature of his acting career. His haunting stare and real scars landed him roles that required authenticity, starting with Braveheart and eventually leading to major roles in gritty crime dramas. The pain became a passport into Hollywood's darker, more intense roles. In a 2014 interview, Flanagan downplayed the trauma, calling it just ancient history now. It was a subtle window into how one survives such a horrifying ordeal. He turned trauma into strength, refusing to let the scar dictate his identity. Yet, the nickname Chips, Glaswegian slang for a blade, followed him into the role that would make him a household name. Fans of Sons of Anarchy instantly recognized the marks as real, not makeup. But with that recognition came invasive curiosity. Flanagan has spoken about his discomfort when people pry too deeply, reminding us that while the Glasgow smile has become a cinematic image, it was first, and always, a personal tragedy. Hollywood often prefers fiction over fact, but sometimes the truth cuts deeper. Flanagan's real scars forced audiences to reckon with the line between entertainment and authentic pain. And for many, it sparked a question: how many others have worn that smile unwillingly? While the Glasgow smile has roots in Western gang violence, its spiritual cousin exists in another culture thousands of miles away, with its own horrifying twist. Enter Kukusei-kana, the slit-mouthed woman, a terrifying figure from Japanese folklore whose legend mirrors the same mutilated grin. Some trace her origins to the Edo period, while others point to a spike in sightings in the 1970s, sparking mass panic in Japan. She's classified as a yokai, a supernatural being, and specifically as an onryo, a vengeful spirit often born from betrayal or violence. According to the most common version of the legend, she was a beautiful woman whose jealous samurai husband disfigured her face as punishment for infidelity, slicing her mouth from ear to ear. In other variations, a woman jealous of her beauty attacked her. Or it was a botched medical procedure. The details shift, but the essence remains chilling. In modern urban legends, she appears wearing a surgical mask eerily familiar in today's world, or sometimes a scarf or fan to hide her face. She approaches her victims, often children, and asks, "Am I pretty?" Say no, and she kills you on the spot. Say yes, and she reveals her mutilated mouth, repeating the question. Answer incorrectly again, and you're dead. It's a no-win trap. Some versions claim you can escape by confusing her or distracting her with money or candy. Others say answering your average buys you just enough time to run. What's truly terrifying about the Kukusei-kana isn't just her method, it's her message. Her tale reflects Japan's complex relationship with beauty, gender roles, and violence. Like the Glasgow smile, it's about control, transforming a symbol of joy, a smile, into one of torment. Unlike gang rituals, her horror is rooted in myth, feeding on cultural fears of disfigurement and punishment for defiance. So why does facial mutilation hold such terrifying power across cultures? Psychologically, visible scarring strikes at the heart of identity. Our faces are how we communicate, how we express emotion, how we're recognized. To destroy that is to destroy the self. The Glasgow smile and its counterparts aren't just acts of violence. They're statements. A mark you carry into every room, every conversation, forever. In gang culture, this mutilation becomes a tool. It's a loyalty test, a rite of passage, or a cruel punishment. You don't just harm someone physically, you strip them of dignity. In some circles, a victim of the Glasgow smile is a warning, a walking billboard that says, "This is what happens when you cross the line." It's human branding taken to a brutal extreme. And the fear is universal. Across cultures, there's a shared horror at the idea of corrupted smiles. The smile, normally associated with joy, love, or peace, becomes nightmarish when forced or mutilated. It taps into the uncanny valley, where something almost human, but not quite right, becomes terrifying. A grin that's too wide. Teeth that shouldn't show. Flesh torn into something grotesquely permanent. This imagery has worked its way into pop culture with disturbing ease. From Heath Ledger's Joker to horror movie villains to grim forensic crime dramas, the Glasgow smile continues to fascinate filmmakers and audiences alike. Ledger's Joker didn't just bring chaos. His disfigurement was the chaos, symbolic of a world turned inside out. Countless horror films have leaned on similar aesthetics to tap into that primal discomfort. Beyond the screen, criminal justice experts have had to deal with the real-world implications. Forensic scientists analyze facial trauma for clues. Profilers study the psychology of those who choose such methods. What message they're sending, what power they're claiming. Medical teams and trauma units have developed specific protocols for repairing these injuries, both physically and emotionally. It's not just about the wound, it's about what the wound means. And in the digital age, the legend only grows. The internet has given new life to stories like Kukisekana. Horror forums, creepypasta stories, and Reddit threads explore variations of her tale, adapting it to modern anxieties. What was once whispered in schoolyards is now trending on TikTok. The Glasgow smile has become a meme, a costume, a viral challenge, detached from its brutal origins. But for those who've lived it, it's not content. It's a curse. Yet through all of this, through the legends, the gangs, the films, and the fear, the Glasgow smile endures as a symbol of something far deeper, humanity's capacity for cruelty. It's a historical echo of the worst in us, evolving across continents, morphing into myth and re-emerging in reality. From Glasgow's soot-streaked slums to the polished screens of Hollywood, from Japanese alleyways to modern forensic labs, the smile never disappears. It shifts. It adapts. It waits in the shadows of society's cracks, ready to remind us that terror doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, it only needs to smile. So the next time you see that twisted grin on screen or read about it in a headline, remember, behind that expression is a lineage of violence, desperation, and fear. It's a reflection of a world where justice is twisted and power is carved into skin. And if you found this journey into darkness gripping, raw, and eye-opening, don't just walk away. Dive deeper. Subscribe to Inside the Secret World of Mafia Titans, where true crime, historical underworlds, and the psychology of violence are exposed like never before. Because the shadows still hold secrets, and we're here to bring them to light.
Did you know one of California's most dangerous gangs took its name from a 1960s comedy TV show? Sounds unbelievable, but that's exactly how the story of F Troop begins. Born from irony, raised in violence, and baptized in blood. This is the real story behind one of Orange County's oldest and most feared Hispanic street gangs. A group that started as a bunch of kids hanging around a community center and evolve into a ruthless force tied to the Mexican Mafia, prison politics, and the kind of violence that changes neighborhoods forever. This is F Troop. Back in the mid-1960s, Santa Ana, California, was transforming. It was a city caught between the American dream and the immigrant reality. Latino families were trying to carve out a life. Their kids just trying to survive. That's when a few teenagers began hanging out at a local spot called the Friendly Center. What started as a place to escape became a place to belong. They called themselves F Troop, a joke at first named after a goofy TV show. But this wasn't fiction. These boys weren't actors, and the story they wrote, it was soaked in pain, power, and permanent consequences. By the 70s and 80s, that joke had become a name you feared. F Troop expanded, block by block, park by park. Soon, they were a network. Subsets like Salvador Park, Barrio Aria, Highland Street, East Side, and 7th Street rose under the F Troop flag. And with each new street they claimed, they changed. More than a gang, they became a machine. Drug trafficking, extortion, robberies, home invasions, drive-by shootings. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a system. One fueled by fear, maintained by violence, and run by loyalty that didn't end on the streets. It followed you into prison. And that's where things got even more dangerous. Because prison wasn't the end for F Troop members. It was just the next chapter. Behind bars, the real power players operated. The Mexican Mafia, also known as LAIM, controlled California's Latino prison population. But their reach? It didn't stop at the prison gates. It extended into neighborhoods, cities, entire regions. And F Troop, they were drafted into the Mafia's war. That's when the name Peter O.A. entered the story. To law enforcement, he was a ghost. To F Troop and LAIM, he was a general. Quiet, calculated, deadly. O.A. began as just another F Troop foot soldier. But he rose fast, not because he was loud, but because he understood how to control. From prison, Peter O.A. ruled the streets of Santa Ana. In January 1992, he made his most strategic move, a peace summit, right in El Salvador Park. No more random drive-bys, he said. They were sloppy, dangerous, and bad for business. From now on, violence would be selective, organized, and profitable. That day, the game changed. O.A. declared, every gang selling drugs on the streets would pay taxes to the Mexican Mafia. F Troop became his enforcers. Obey or would disappear. Suddenly, the gang wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. Under O.A.'s command, they ran a shadow government of crime. Drugs flowed, money piled up, and anyone who challenged it ended up in a morgue or disappeared behind bars. He even did it all from inside a prison cell. But power breeds enemies. And Peter O.A. had one in particular, Armando Moreno. Moreno was younger, fiercer, and he wanted more. He wasn't content living under O.A.'s rules. He believed the empire needed fresh blood, new leadership, and he was willing to tear it all down to get it. What followed were riots, threats, and a gang war with no borders. Moreno rallied soldiers. O.A. responded with prison politics and prison justice. But just when Moreno seemed poised to take control, his past caught up with him. He had once affiliated with a Blackstreet gang. That single fact destroyed his credibility inside the deeply racialized prison hierarchy. It was over. O.A. stayed on top. Moreno faded into the shadows. And F Troop marched on, until federal authorities had enough. In 2011, they launched Operation Black Flag, a sweeping takedown that resulted in 99 arrests, including Peter O.A. and his girlfriend, Susie Rodriguez. Charges included racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, and extortion. It was one of the biggest blows to the gang in decades. But even from prison, O.A.'s influence lingered. He died in 2020, but the legacy still lives on, because F Troop didn't just create killers. It also forged survivors, and one of them became a legend. His name? Tito Ortiz. Yes, the UFC light heavyweight champion. The face of MMA. He was once F Troop. Tito was jumped into the gang at just 9 years old. That's right, 9. He took the beating, earned the stripes, and walked the walk. Robberies, drug use, violence. It was all he knew, until one day, a friend was gunned down in a drive-by. That moment broke him and saved him. He realized the path he was on ended in a grave or a prison cell. So he chose a different fight. Wrestling. It gave him structure, purpose, a reason to keep going. He poured everything into the sport, and eventually, he rose. Not just out of Santa Ana, but to the world stage. The same fist that once defended turf now held championship belts. He says it himself. Without wrestling, I'd be dead or in jail. Tito's story is rare, but powerful, because it proves something we don't say enough. Escape is possible, but let's be honest, most never make it out. Today, despite crackdowns, F-Troop still exists, still recruits, still controls parts of Orange County. Its structure has evolved. New faces, new tech, new rules. But the mission? Still the same. Power through fear, loyalty through blood. What does this tell us? That gangs like F-Troop are just about crime? No, they're symptoms of poverty, of broken schools, of absent fathers, of communities abandoned by opportunity and soaked in survival. F-Troop started as a joke, a group of teenagers naming themselves after a sitcom, but it turned into something real and deadly. It turned kids into killers, friends into enemies, streets into graveyards. And yet, inside that tragedy are moments of redemption, of resilience, of people like Tito Ortiz who climbed out of the abyss. But how many more Titas are stuck? How many more Petes are waiting to be recruited? We've seen the problem. It's time to ask the hard question. Can this cycle ever be broken? Can outreach, sports, mentorship, and opportunity stop the next generation from walking into the same war? Let us know what you think in the comments. Have you seen gang life up close? What worked? What didn't? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because we're bringing you more real stories from inside the underworld. Stories that go beyond headlines. Stories that matter. This was the story of F-Troop, a gang named after a joke that became anything but funny.
In the chaotic streets of mid-19th century New York, one man stood out as both a hero to some and a menace to others. Bill the Butcher Poole, with his ruthless temper and unparalleled ferocity, carved a reputation that made him both feared and revered. His life of brutality and political intrigue even inspired the chilling antagonist in Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York. Yet, like many who live by the sword, his violent ways ultimately led to his death at just 33 years old. New York City in the mid-1800s was a rough and riotous place, where the rule of law often gave way to the rule of fists. It was a city teeming with opportunity and chaos, where a knife-wielding pugilist could rise to fame among both the public and the press. While times have changed, one might argue that the spirit of those gritty streets still lingers beneath the city's polished exterior. Bill Poole's story begins on July 24, 1821, in northern New Jersey. Born the son of a butcher, his early life was one of hard work and simple living. When Poole was just 10, his family moved to New York City, where he followed in his father's footsteps, eventually taking over the family butcher shop in Lower Manhattan's Washington Market. By the 1850s, Poole was a family man living with his wife and young son, Charles, in a modest brick home on Christopher Street near the Hudson River. Physically, Poole was an imposing figure. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, he was well-built, quick on his feet, and carried himself with a bold demeanor. His striking appearance, complete with a thick mustache, added to his larger-than-life persona. However, beneath the polished exterior was a tempestuous man with a penchant for confrontation. The New York Times once described him as polite when calm, but dangerously haughty and volatile when provoked. He was a fighter, ready for action at any sign of insult. The paper noted, capturing the fiery spirit that earned him both admirers and enemies. Poole's reputation as a fighter was unmatched. Known for his rough and tumble style, he was infamous for taking fights to brutal extremes. Eye gouging, scratching, biting. No tactic was off limits in his quest to dominate his opponents. As a butcher by trade, he was equally skilled with knives, a talent that would later contribute to his fearsome reputation on the streets of Manhattan. But Poole wasn't just a brawler. He was also a leader. He rose to prominence as a head figure of the Bowery Boys, a nativist gang notorious for their staunch anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic views. The Bowery Boys aligned themselves with the Know-Nothing political movement, a xenophobic faction that believed Irish immigrants were undermining America's Protestant values and democratic ideals. In the volatile streets of antebellum New York, this movement often turned violent, with gangs like the Bowery Boys clashing against Irish Catholic groups such as the Dead Rabbits. Among Poole's most notable enemies was John "Old Smoke" Morrissey, an Irish-born bare-knuckle boxer and political enforcer. Morrissey represented everything Poole despised, an immigrant and a key figure in the Tammany Hall political machine, which championed pro-immigrant policies and was dominated by Irish Americans. Despite being a decade younger, Morrissey was as arrogant and bold as Poole, and their rivalry was destined to turn violent. The animosity between the two finally erupted in July 1854 when they encountered each other at the City Hotel. Morrissey, confident in his abilities, challenged Poole. "You dare not fight me for $100. Name your place and time." Never one to back down, Poole agreed, setting the fight for the next morning at the Amos Street docks, now West 10th Street. By dawn, a crowd had gathered at the docks, eager for the spectacle. Poole arrived in his rowboat, exuding confidence, while spectators doubted Morrissey would even show. But by 6:30 a.m., Morrissey appeared, ready to face his rival. The two circled each other briefly before Morrissey threw the first punch. Poole ducked, grabbed him by the waist, and threw him to the ground. What followed was a display of Poole's notorious fighting style. Pinning Morrissey to the ground, he scratched, bit, and gouged relentlessly. The fight ended with Morrissey's face bloodied and disfigured, his right eye so damaged that the New York Times reported he was scarce recognized by his friends. Humiliated, Morrissey admitted defeat and was whisked away to recover, while Poole celebrated with a toast before rowing back to shore. The fight's aftermath was as contentious as the brawl itself. Some claimed Poole's victory was unfair, alleging his supporters interfered, while others argued he triumphed single-handedly. The truth remains murky, but one fact is certain. The fight cemented Poole's reputation as a brutal and fearless fighter. For Poole, victory meant celebration. While Morrissey retreated to nurse his wounds and plan his revenge, Poole and his allies headed to Coney Island to revel in their triumph, unaware of the dark twists their rivalry would soon take. On the night of February 25, 1855, the bitter feud between Bill the Butcher Poole and John Morrissey reached its fateful climax. It was around 10 p.m. when Morrissey, seated in the back room of Stanwix Hall, a saloon frequented by political partisans in what is now Soho, heard that his nemesis, Poole, had just entered. Tension filled the air as Morrissey confronted Poole, hurling curses and challenging him once again. Accounts of what happened next vary, but all agree that violence was imminent. Some say Morrissey pulled a pistol and snapped it 3 times at Poole's head, only for it to misfire. Others claim both men drew their weapons in a tense standoff, daring the other to pull the trigger. Before the situation could escalate further, the saloon owners called the authorities, and the 2 men were taken to separate police stations. Remarkably, neither was charged, and both were soon released. While Poole returned to Stanwix Hall with his friends, Morrissey's whereabouts remained unclear. But the night was far from over. Around midnight, 6 of Morrissey's men entered Stanwix Hall. Among them were Louis Baker, James Turner, and Patrick Powdean McLaughlin, each harboring personal grudges against Poole, who had humiliated or beaten them in the past. Fueled by revenge and outnumbering Poole, they were ready for blood. Powdean McLaughlin taunted Poole, trying to provoke a fight. Despite being spat on multiple times and called a black-muzzled bastard, Poole refused to engage, knowing the odds were stacked against him. But the restraint didn't last long. "Let's sail into him anyhow," James Turner shouted. Tossing aside his cloak, he revealed a Colt revolver, leveling it at Poole. In the chaos, Turner's first shot misfired, shattering his own arm. Undeterred, he fired again, hitting Poole in the leg and shoulder. As Poole staggered toward the door, Louis Baker intercepted him. "I guess I'll take you anyhow," Baker sneered before shooting Poole in the chest. For 11 agonizing days, Poole clung to life. Though the bullet didn't pierce his heart, it lodged in the sack surrounding it, leaving him in unbearable pain. On March 8, 1855, Bill the Butcher Poole succumbed to his injuries. His final words, spoken with pride, were, "Goodbye, boys. I die a true American." Poole's funeral, held on March 11, 1855, drew thousands of supporters who lined the streets to pay their respects. He was laid to rest at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, his procession a stark reminder of his polarizing legacy. For the nativist movement, Poole was a martyr, a symbol of their xenophobic cause. Not everyone viewed his death with reverence. The New York Herald remarked with biting irony, "Public honors on a most magnificent scale were paid to the memory of a pugilist, a man whose past life has in it much to condemn and very little to commend." A manhunt for Poole's killers soon followed, but justice proved elusive. Despite their arrests, the trials ended in hung juries, with no convictions. Louis Baker and his accomplices walked free, while Poole's legacy lived on in infamy. Today, William Poole is immortalized not just in the annals of history, but also through the captivating portrayal of Daniel Day-Lewis in Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York. While the character of Bill the Butcher Cutting takes creative liberties, the essence of the real Poole, his charisma, ferocity, and nativist ideology, remains intact. Though Poole's life was cut short at just 33, he ensured that his name would echo through generations. Love him or hate him, his story continues to serve as a stark reflection of America's turbulent past, a reminder of how violence and prejudice can shape a man's legacy. William Poole's story is one of power, violence, and a fractured society struggling to define itself. But what do we learn from such a figure? Are we destined to repeat the divisions and hostilities of the past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to explore more fascinating and complex stories from history. Join us as we uncover the truths that shaped the world we live in today. Imagine a criminal mastermind so ruthless that even the hardened underworld of organized crime found his actions extreme. Yet he was as brilliant as he was brutal. This is the story of Anthony Gaspipe Casso, a man who climbed to the top of the Mafia hierarchy while leaving a trail of blood, betrayal, and millions in stolen riches. But was Casso just a killer, or could his cunning have made him a success in the legal world? Let's uncover the life of one of the most feared mobsters in history. Anthony Casso, born May 21, 1942, in Brooklyn, seemed destined for the criminal path from the start. The third child in his family, he grew up in a household that never went without, even during the Great Depression. His father, Michael Casso, worked as a dockhand in the Brooklyn shipyards but had a secret weapon, a close friendship with Salvatore Big Sal Catena, a capo in the Genovese family. Thanks to Catena's influence, there was always work for Michael, and Anthony entered a world where mafia connections meant survival and success. Michael Casso, known in his circles as Gaspipe for carrying an 8-inch lead pipe during street fights, passed the nickname to his son. While Anthony's childhood was filled with love and stability, his admiration for his father's world of respect and power drew him toward the streets. Anthony's school years were unremarkable. He struggled with subjects like history and literature, but excelled in math. Numbers fascinated him, not for their logic, but for their connection to money, something Anthony loved above all else. It was also during this time that young Anthony discovered another passion: guns. His father often took him on hunting trips in the forests of New Jersey, where he became a skilled marksman. Local dove owners even hired Anthony to shoot hawks preying on their birds. But it wasn't just target practice that thrilled him. He was captivated by the authority and respect his father's Mafia friends commanded. He wanted that same power for himself. Despite Michael's dreams of seeing his son become a lawyer or doctor, Anthony gravitated toward the streets. By his teenage years, he joined the South Brooklyn Boys, a group of local troublemakers. Though not serious criminals, the gang offered a stepping stone to bigger opportunities in the underworld. At just 16, Anthony dropped out of school, and his godfather, Sal Catena, secured him a job at the docks. The fact that he was underage was no issue. A fake birth certificate ensured Anthony could work and earn a paycheck. Anthony's charm and street smarts caught the attention of more influential figures, including Christopher "Christy Tick" Furnari, a rising star in the Lucchese family. Furnari managed gambling and loan sharking operations and quickly took Anthony under his wing. Starting small, Casso collected money from bookmakers and loan sharks and managed 2 after-hours nightclubs. These roles came with their share of conflict, and Anthony made it a habit to carry a gun, solving problems with force when needed. By the spring of 1961, at just 19 years old, Anthony found himself in serious trouble. He intervened when a local thug, Bobby Bebop, harassed a young woman. Accounts differ on whether Anthony acted on his own or at the woman's request, but the confrontation escalated quickly. When Bebop shoved him, Anthony pulled a gun and shot him several times. Though critically injured, Bobby survived. This incident put a target on Anthony's back, not only from the police, but from Bobby's uncle, a captain in the Genovese family. Fearing retaliation, Anthony turned to his father and godfather for help. They decided he should lay low, hiding out at his girlfriend's family home in the countryside. Meanwhile, his father attempted to bribe local authorities to drop the case. However, the $50,000 price tag was out of reach for the Casso family. To make matters worse, Bobby and his brother began searching the city day and night, vowing to settle the score. This was just the beginning of Anthony Casso's journey into the heart of organized crime, a path that would make him both revered and feared, earning him a reputation as one of the most dangerous mobsters of his time. Anthony Casso's path was never without danger, and one particularly tense moment could have ended his criminal career before it fully began. A rival, furious over a previous altercation, stormed into a club where young Anthony often hung out. Armed with a sawed-off shotgun, he made a public display of his intentions, announcing that it was meant for Anthony. The situation seemed dire, but Anthony's father found an unexpected solution. With the help of Sal Catena, a trusted ally, he brokered peace with the rival's family. The terms? A $10,000 payment to smooth things over, and Anthony would turn himself into the authorities. At the trial, however, the rival conveniently failed to identify Anthony as the shooter, sparing him from prison. Despite this close call, Anthony was more determined than ever to climb the ranks of the criminal underworld. While his ventures were already lucrative, he wanted more. Teaming up with truck drivers, he devised a bold scheme. Drivers hauling high-demand items like electronics, leather goods, or clothing would lose their trucks to Anthony for $10,000. They'd report the theft to the police, who would eventually recover the empty truck. Meanwhile, Anthony sold the goods through his network of fences, making a tidy profit. Anthony also cultivated relationships with harbor guards in New York City. These guards, eager to make extra money, helped him move stolen goods efficiently. By 1970, Casso's success allowed him to fulfill a dream for his family. He purchased a small country house for his parents. Tragically, Michael Casso passed away later that same year, leaving Anthony devastated. To cope, he threw himself deeper into his work. Among his many ventures, Anthony led a group known as the Bypass Gang, a highly skilled crew specializing in high-stakes robberies. Their targets? Jewelry stores and bank vaults. Their methods were meticulous. They would wait for banks to close on Friday evenings and then spring into action, breaking into vaults and ransacking safe deposit boxes. Anthony believed the key to a successful heist lay in preparation, and he spared no expense on tools. He purchased advanced equipment, including a specialized torch capable of cutting through steel, and a van with bulletproof, tinted windows to ensure quick and secure getaways. The gang's meticulous planning extended to reconnaissance, often conducted over days. They'd park their van near the target and appear to leave it unattended. In reality, 2 team members stayed inside, discreetly monitoring bank employees' comings and goings, noting cars and license plates, and studying the bank's routines. Only when they were certain the coast was clear would they make their move. Anthony's attention to detail paid off. He even went so far as to purchase alarm systems identical to those used by his targets, allowing the gang to rehearse disabling them beforehand. After a robbery, the loot was carefully cataloged. Casso leveraged his connections with white-collar criminals to offload stolen bonds and stocks, while jewelers and buyers in his network provided cash for stolen jewelry without asking too many questions. The Bypass Gang's operations were astonishingly successful. Over their run, they stole an estimated $100 million in cash, bonds, and valuables, cementing Anthony Casso's reputation as a mastermind of organized crime. Did you know? One of Anthony Casso's crew members, Frankie Beans May, had a surprising connection to Hollywood. He was friends with James Caan, the actor who famously portrayed Sonny Corleone in The Godfather. Frankie often shared stories about his criminal exploits, particularly the advanced tools Casso's crew used to crack safes. These tales made such an impression on Caan that he passed them on to filmmaker Michael Mann. Years later, Mann used those insights to create the 1981 film Thief, with a lead character who bore an uncanny resemblance to Anthony Casso himself. As Anthony's reputation grew, so did the trust of his mentor, Christopher "Christy Tick" Furnari. Shortly after the death of Anthony's father, Furnari handed him a critical task. One of Furnari's associates, a marijuana dealer known as Sammy the Jew, discovered that one of his clients was working as a police informant. Sammy's source, a contact within the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, confirmed the tip, making it a serious threat. Furnari tasked Anthony with eliminating the snitch. Anthony carried out the job flawlessly, earning a new reputation, not just as a skilled safecracker, but also as a reliable killer. By the early 1970s, Casso expanded his criminal operations into drug trafficking. In 1971, through his longtime ally Vic Amuso, Anthony was introduced to Oscar, a Florida-based drug dealer. Oscar supplied marijuana from South America and even connected Casso with a fishing trawler captain who smuggled the goods. These handoffs took place at night, far out at sea, where marijuana bales were quickly transferred onto smaller motorboats. Marijuana sales brought in steady profits, but Anthony wanted more. He soon ventured into cocaine and heroin distribution. To support this growing business, he rented a warehouse in Sheepshead Bay to store his inventory. Business was booming, and Casso's success allowed him to buy 3 shrimp trawlers to enhance his smuggling operations. Rumor even circulated that Casso had purchased a Boeing 707 cargo plane to transport drugs directly from South America, though this claim remains unverified. As Casso's empire grew, so did law enforcement's interest in him. In the fall of 1972, FBI agents arrested Anthony and several members of his crew. Though Anthony quickly posted bail, the arrest was a wake-up call. He needed to know who had betrayed him. His attorney, Michael Rosen, revealed that the informant was Bobby Dineish, a minor associate who had occasionally helped the crew. Casso turned to his trusted friend, Gregory Scarpa, a notorious mobster with deep ties to the FBI. Scarpa discovered through his law enforcement channels that Dinesh was being held in Topeka, Kansas. Casso sent a chilling message to Dinesh, warning him not to identify Anthony in court. The threat worked. Terrified at how quickly Anthony had tracked him down, Dinesh agreed to stay silent. This incident taught Casso a critical lesson. To stay ahead, he needed allies within law enforcement. Anthony soon partnered with NYPD detectives Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito, who became his inside men. For a hefty price, they fed him critical intelligence, tipping him off about investigations and ensuring he stayed one step ahead of the law. Meanwhile, Scarpa continued to share FBI intel with Anthony, strengthening their bond. The two often collaborated, from hijacking truckloads of merchandise to orchestrating robberies at JFK Airport. Scarpa even offered to sponsor Anthony's entry into the Colombo crime family, but Casso declined, choosing to stay loyal to his Lucchese connections. In 1974, Anthony Gaspipe Casso officially became a made man in the Lucchese family alongside his lifelong friend, Vic Amuso. The two joined Christopher Fornari's crew, solidifying their positions within the organization. Around this time, Casso gained another valuable contact within the FBI, an agent named Doug McCain. McCain provided Anthony with insider information about federal investigations, which Casso generously shared with mobsters from other families, further cementing his reputation as a power broker in the criminal underworld. However, Casso knew his burgeoning drug empire would eventually draw the attention of federal authorities. That reckoning began when another associate, Paul Bennett, turned informant. Bennett, a skilled engineer who had designed hidden compartments for Casso's smuggling vehicles, proved to be far less adept as a drug dealer. His betrayal would set the stage for even greater challenges in Casso's rise through the Mafia ranks. Anthony Casso's drug empire faced a major blow when one of his associates, Paul Bennett, decided to betray him. Bennett was arrested while trying to sell 10 pounds of marijuana. Facing jail time, he cracked under pressure and gave federal agents detailed information about Casso's operations. Among his revelations was the identity of a fishing trawler Anthony used to smuggle drugs from Colombia. Acting on this tip, the feds informed the Coast Guard and Marine Patrol. When the trawler docked in Far Rockaway Bay and its crew began unloading, law enforcement surrounded the pier. The bust yielded a staggering 9 tons of marijuana, with a wholesale value of nearly $5 million. Furious and needing to act swiftly, Anthony turned to his FBI informant, Doug McCain, to uncover how the feds had learned about the shipment. It didn't take long for McCain to point the finger at Bennett. Casso wasted no time exacting revenge. Rather than using a hitman from the Lucchese family, Anthony enlisted Roy DeMeo, a notorious contract killer whose livelihood heavily depended on drug profits. Roy, eager to stay in Casso's favor, took care of the job. Just days later, Paul Bennett was gunned down on the doorstep of his home. But Anthony wasn't finished. To ensure there were no loose ends, he ordered the deaths of the trawler's captain and his son, who had served as the assistant captain. In Casso's mind, their knowledge of his operation made them a liability the feds could exploit. By late 1980, Christopher Fornari, then serving as consigliere of the Lucchese family, suggested that Casso take on the role of capo. He believed Anthony had earned the position through his growing influence and resourcefulness. While flattered, Casso declined and instead recommended his longtime ally, Vic Amuso, for the role. Vic's promotion marked a new chapter for the family, while Casso turned his focus to innovating his drug smuggling operations. Adapting to the changing landscape, Casso began importing marijuana through City Island in the Bronx, transporting it by truck to a Brooklyn warehouse. At the same time, he expanded into cocaine trafficking, sourcing the product from Colombia. His shipments arrived via small planes landing at private airstrips in Fort Lauderdale. For one particularly large shipment, Anthony reportedly paid the Colombians $1 million, a testament to the lucrative nature of his dealings. One of Casso's key partners in the drug trade was Gerard Papa. Gerard also had a hand in New York's construction business through Arista Windows, a company he co-owned with Peter Savino. Their firm secured lucrative city contracts thanks to the Lucchese family's control over Local 580, the union overseeing metalwork and windows. Anthony himself invested $500,000 into the business, helping Gerard and Peter set up a warehouse and renovate their operations. But Gerard's darker tendencies soon surfaced. In the spring of 1980, he murdered 2 men and concealed their bodies in the foundation of the warehouse under construction. One victim, Shorty Spiro, was a Colombo family member, and the unauthorized killing did not go unnoticed. On June 16, 1980, Gerard paid the ultimate price, killed by a Colombo hitman as retribution. Despite this, the window business thrived, generating profits not just for the Lucchese family, but for the Colombo, Gambino, and Genovese families as well. Each window installation brought in substantial earnings for the mob. Around the same time, Anthony met Murat Balagula, a Soviet immigrant who had made his fortune in the gasoline racket. When Murat ran into trouble with the Colombo family, he sought help from Christopher Furnari, offering a share of his profits in exchange for protection. This partnership further expanded Anthony's reach into lucrative rackets beyond traditional mafia operations. However, trouble loomed on the horizon for the Lucchese family. For years, they controlled Long Island's waste disposal industry. But a small, privately owned firm run by Robert Kabaka refused to cooperate with the mob. After enduring repeated threats, Kabaka turned to law enforcement for help. Seeing an opportunity, federal agents convinced Kabaka to wear a wire and secretly record meetings with mafia representatives. While Kabaka couldn't catch Salvatore Avellino, the Lucchese member overseeing the garbage racket, on tape, his cooperation led to a judge approving a wiretap on Avellino's home phone. The feds soon realized Avellino rarely used his home phone, as he spent most of his time chauffeuring Lucchese boss Anthony "Tony Ducks" Corallo. In 1983, agents installed a recording device in Avellino's car, capturing numerous conversations in which Corallo discussed the inner workings of the Lucchese family and its dealings with other mafia organizations. These tapes became crucial evidence in the Commission case, a landmark federal prosecution under the RICO Act that brought down several high-ranking members of New York's 5 families. Paul Castellano was notably absent from the courtroom docks as the other family bosses awaited trial. That would change on December 16, 1985, when Castellano was assassinated in downtown Manhattan, a story detailed in our John Gotti and Salvatore Gravano videos. As these mob trials loomed, Anthony Casso's Russian associate, Murat Balagula, found himself in trouble. Michael Franzese of the Colombo family approached Balagula, demanding a cut of his profits. Unsure how to handle the situation, Balagula sought advice from Casso, who brought Christopher Furnari into the fold. Furnari brokered a deal ensuring everyone shared in Balagula's lucrative fuel tax scam. Over time, this racket became one of the most profitable ventures in organized crime, second only to drug trafficking. Balagula, feeling untouchable as Brighton Beach's most powerful figure, underestimated a new threat. Vladimir Reznikov, a fearsome enforcer from the Russian underworld, decided to challenge his authority. On June 12, 1986, Reznikov stormed into Balagula's office, wielding an AK-47. He opened fire, killing one of Balagula's associates and injuring others. The chaos didn't end there. Reznikov later confronted Balagula at the Odessa nightclub, pointing the rifle directly at his head. He demanded $600,000, threatening to wipe out Balagula's entire family if he didn't pay up by the next day. The encounter left Balagula so shaken he suffered a heart attack. Despite his condition, Balagula managed to relay the situation to Casso, who viewed the threat as a personal insult. Casso reassured Balagula, requesting a photo of Reznikov. The next day, As Reznikov arrived at the Odessa to collect his money, Balagula was nowhere to be found. Frustrated, Reznikov headed to his car. Just as he opened the door, Casso's men, Anthony Center and Joey Testa, both veterans of Roy DeMeo's crew, eliminated him with a hail of bullets. Meanwhile, the Lucchese family faced its own trials. Family boss Tony Corallo, fully aware the government aimed to lock him up for life, began considering his successor. Despite being a natural choice, Casso declined the position, instead recommending Vic Amuso for the top spot. Amuso became the new boss, with Casso stepping in as consigliere. Christopher Fernari, Casso's longtime mentor, was also convicted, and leadership of his crew passed to Peter Fat Pete Chiodo. As John Gotti rose to power in the Gambino family, Vincent the Chin Gigante, boss of the Genovese family, sought revenge for Castellano's murder. After several failed attempts to assassinate Gotti, Gigante turned to Casso for help. Casso devised a plan to take out Gotti using explosives, a bold and unconventional move for the Mafia. With the help of Gigante's bomb expert, Herbie Pate, Casso planted a device under Frank DeCicco's car. DeCicco, a Gambino family underboss and Gotti loyalist, was supposed to be traveling with Gotti that day. On April 16, 1986, the bomb detonated, but Gotti wasn't in the car. DeCicco died in the explosion, and the assassination attempt on Gotti failed. Later that year, Casso narrowly avoided becoming a victim himself. James Heidel, working under Gambino capo Angelo Ruggiero, led a hit team targeting Casso. Although Ruggiero denied Gotti's involvement, rumors swirled that the attempt stemmed from Casso taking too large a cut of the heroin trade. Heidel and his team faced a daunting task. Casso's deep connections within the Mafia, law enforcement, and the FBI made him a difficult target. After weeks of searching for his address, the hitmen learned that Casso would be meeting an associate at the Golden Bull restaurant to settle a dispute over stolen bonds. The plan was to strike when Casso exited his car. However, their attempt was foiled. On that quiet Sunday evening, the street was nearly empty, allowing Casso to notice a suspicious vehicle. He spotted a shotgun barrel emerging from a car window just in time to duck for cover. Before he could grab his gun from under his seat, the would-be assassins fired, but their shots missed their mark. Casso's near miss only solidified his reputation as a man who was nearly impossible to kill, a fact that would haunt his enemies for years to come. Although wounded, Anthony Casso managed to escape his car and dash into the nearby restaurant. His would-be assassins, having struggled to open their car door, were delayed just long enough for their target to get away. Casso was left questioning who might have ordered the hit. He had plenty of enemies, but the amateur nature of the attack puzzled him. Why had such an important job been handed to inexperienced gunmen? Determined to find answers, Casso quickly recovered from his minor injuries and launched an investigation. His first stop was Gregory Scarpa, who revealed that the man behind the botched hit was James Heidel. Casso recognized the name but didn't know much about him. Thanking Scarpa, Casso turned to his FBI informant, Doug McCain, for more information. McCain confirmed that Heidel had ties to the Gambino family through his great-uncle, Daniel Marino, and even provided the address where Heidel was staying with his mother. With this lead, Casso enlisted two corrupt police officers, Eppolito and Caracappa, to apprehend Heidel. On October 18, 1986, Heidel was kidnapped, stuffed into the trunk of a car, and taken to one of Casso's safe houses. There, under a brutal interrogation, Heidel spilled everything. He named everyone involved in the assassination attempt, including Angelo Ruggiero, as well as others in the car that night and those waiting as backup. Heidel's confession convinced Casso that John Gotti himself was behind the attack. Casso decided to stage a trial of sorts. He invited Gotti and Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano to hear Heidel's testimony firsthand. Gotti refused to attend, instead sending two trusted capos, Joe Butch Corral and Handsome Jack Giordano, to represent him. In their presence, Aniello repeated his accusations. As soon as he finished, Casso had him executed on the spot. The Gambino emissaries insisted Gotti had no part in the plot and assured Casso that Ruggiero would face consequences. Despite their assurances, Casso launched his own campaign of retribution, systematically eliminating anyone he suspected of involvement. Even Fat Vinny, the racketeer Casso was supposed to meet the night of the attempted hit, wasn't spared. He was killed by Ippolito and Caracappa, and his body was later discovered in the trunk of his car. Ruggiero, however, evaded Casso's wrath. On December 5, 1989, he succumbed to cancer, sparing him a violent end. By then, Casso had much bigger problems. Federal investigators had flipped Peter Savino, a former partner in Gerard Papa's Arista Windows racket. Savino agreed to wear a wire, and the recordings he captured surpassed all expectations. Notably, Savino managed to record candid conversations with Vincent Giganti, the Genovese boss. Despite Giganti's public persona as a mentally unstable man, these tapes revealed him as a calculating and lucid leader. Casso learned of Savino's betrayal through his FBI informant, Doug McCain. Realizing the severity of the situation, Casso quickly informed Giganti of the recordings. Meanwhile, the walls were closing in. The FBI was building a strong racketeering case against Casso and his ally, Vicamuzzo. Facing imminent indictments, the two consulted their lawyers and decided their best option was to go into hiding. Their plan was to lay low, assess the evidence against them, and eventually surrender to fight the charges in court. Casso knew that disappearing would make him a top target for the FBI. His name would dominate headlines, and he would undoubtedly land on the agency's most wanted list. Before going underground, he passed leadership of the Lucchese family to Alphonse Darco and devised a communication system with his loyalists. He meticulously recorded the phone numbers and addresses of key associates across Brooklyn, Long Island, and the Bronx. Through this network, Casso intended to maintain control from the shadows. By May 1990, Casso left New York, heading to northern New Jersey to hide. 2 weeks earlier, Amuzzo had relocated to Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he had already purchased a safe house. Shortly after Casso's departure, federal agents raided his New York home with a warrant for his arrest, marking the beginning of a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Anthony Casso's wife played her part well, telling the FBI that she had no idea where her husband was. Meanwhile, Casso, known as Gaspipe, was quietly managing his affairs from the shadows. Avoiding any direct contact with his family, he only sent his wife short notes every 2 weeks to reassure her of his safety, always accompanied by bags of cash. To further conceal his identity, Casso grew a beard and often wore sunglasses and baseball caps. His only regular meetings were with Alphonse Darco, whom he met in discreet public locations like malls or restaurants. Despite his low profile, Casso was fixated on exacting revenge against Peter Savino, the informant who had betrayed him. However, the FBI had placed Savino under tight security at a military base in Hawaii, making him untouchable. Frustrated but undeterred, Casso turned his attention back to running the Lucchese family from the shadows. In the spring of 1991, family member Peter "Fat Pete" Chiodo was indicted on RICO charges. Facing the possibility of life in prison, Chiodo decided to plead guilty to lesser charges, hoping for a lighter sentence. Unfortunately for Casso and Vicamuzzo, Chiodo's plea implicated them both. Furious, Casso ordered Chiodo's death. Realizing there was a hit on him, Chiodo became increasingly cautious, limiting his outings and preparing for sentencing, which he thought would bring him safety behind bars. What Casso didn't know was that Chiodo had no intention of cooperating with authorities. He simply wanted to serve his time quietly. Chiodo's survival instincts kicked in, but so did his arrogance. Before fleeing to upstate New York, he stopped at a Staten Island service station to prepare his car for the long journey. Casso's men, including Darco's son Joe, saw this as their chance. However, their attempt was poorly executed. Kyoto spotted the hitmen and opened fire, but despite firing 6 shots, he missed his targets. The hitmen, however, unleashed a hail of bullets, hitting Kyoto 12 times. Miraculously, his excess weight acted as a shield, preventing the bullets from hitting vital organs. After recovering in the hospital, a furious and frightened Kyoto agreed to cooperate with the government. He became a key witness against Casso, Amuso, and other Lucchese members. Casso, enraged by the betrayal, sent a chilling threat to Kyoto. If he testified, his elderly parents would be murdered. Mafia traditions had long prohibited targeting blood relatives, but Casso broke this rule. Despite Kyoto taking the threat seriously, enrolling his family in witness protection, the Lucchese family didn't stop there. The hitmen targeted Kyoto's uncle, Frank Signorino, whose body was found stuffed in a car trunk. They also went after Kyoto's sister, Patricia Capazzo, ambushing her as she returned home after dropping her kids at school. Though critically injured, she survived, further motivating Kyoto to testify against the Lucchese leadership. Casso blamed Alphonse Darco for these escalating failures, accusing him of incompetence. By July 1991, Casso and Amuso called a meeting with their capos and stripped Darco of his leadership role, shifting control to a collective. Paranoid and increasingly isolated, Darco began to fear for his life. Convinced the FBI was his only escape, he defected and provided critical information about the family's inner workings. Simultaneously, Casso and Amuso faced resistance from Anthony Tumac Achetero, a longtime Lucchese capo who ran the family's New Jersey and Florida operations. Despite being loyal to previous leadership, Achetero clashed with the younger generation's demands for more money. By 1987, Achetero was on trial for RICO charges, but his old-school code of omerta kept him silent. When he was acquitted, Casso and Amuso saw this as an insult and launched a campaign to eliminate him and his crew. Most of Acetero's men defected to Casso's side, but 14 stayed loyal. Casso ordered their executions and sent hitmen after Achetero and his son in Florida. Familiar with the area, the Aceteros evaded capture, even using corrupt local cops to their advantage. Eventually, federal prosecutors brought new charges against Achetero, and faced with health issues, he decided to cooperate after Casso's men murdered his wife. His defection marked another major blow to the Lucchese leadership. By mid-1991, Vic Amuso's luck ran out. He was arrested in Scranton, Pennsylvania, after an anonymous tip, and was denied bail. With Amuso incarcerated, Casso assumed full control of the family, but paranoia spread like wildfire. At a September meeting, Darco, now visibly haggard, became convinced that he was next on Casso's hit list after spotting a known assassin. He fled the meeting and immediately turned himself over to the FBI. Amuso, meanwhile, languished in prison, refusing a bizarre escape plan orchestrated by Casso, suspecting it was a trap. In January 1993, he was convicted of RICO charges and sentenced to life in prison. Casso, still on the run, believed he could outlast the government's case against him. However, on January 19, 1993, the FBI tracked him down using cell phone records. Another theory suggests his downfall was due to an associate, Burton Kaplan, who inadvertently led authorities to his location. Once incarcerated, Casso wasted no time building alliances with corrupt prison guards. He attempted several escape plans, from bribing guards to smuggle weapons to plotting to overpower prison staff during transfers. However, his schemes failed, often foiled by sheer bad luck or heightened security following major events like the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Despite his ingenuity, Casso's days of freedom were over. While Vic Amuso vetoed Gaspipe Casso's ambitious escape plan, the government presented Casso with a life-altering offer: plead guilty and face a 22-year sentence, with the possibility of release in 15 years for good behavior. Despite this lifeline, Casso hesitated. He deemed even 15 years too steep and compared unfavorably to the lenient 5.5 years Phil Leonetti of Philadelphia secured through cooperation. In February 1994, Casso finally agreed to cooperate. Pleading guilty to an astounding 72 charges, he was transferred to the La Tuna prison in Texas, the very cell that once housed Joe Valachi, the mobster who had famously exposed the Mafia's structure decades earlier. Yet, Casso's collaboration with federal agents quickly turned turbulent. When Casso began revealing damning accounts of corruption, like his dealings with crooked cops Eppolito and Caracappa, agents welcomed the information. However, the moment he mentioned dealings with Doug McCain or the drug transactions with Sammy Gravano, he was sharply silenced. Gravano, who had been the star witness in major Mafia trials, was clearly off-limits. If Casso testified about Gravano's drug activities, it could dismantle Gravano's credibility, exposing him as a perjurer and jeopardizing high-profile convictions. Though Casso testified before Senate committees and provided chilling details of mob atrocities, investigators became wary of his utility. His status as the sole witness to many crimes undermined his credibility. Even years later, when Gravano faced charges for drug trafficking, which corroborated Casso's claims, the government remained disinterested in Gaspipe's testimony. In 1998, the government dropped Casso from the Witness Protection Program, citing his repeated violations. Observers suspected this was a convenient excuse to sever ties with him. His appeal to reverse the decision failed, and Casso was sentenced to an astronomical 455 years in prison without parole. Amid this turmoil, his wife Lillian remained a rare source of solace. Despite Gaspipe's infidelities and crimes, she refused to abandon him, raising their children alone. However, tragedy struck when Frankie Sortino of the Colombo family extorted Lillian, claiming Casso's cooperation had harmed his associates. With no one to protect her, Lillian surrendered $100,000, but was soon hounded for more. Gaspipe, powerless behind bars, desperately wrote to federal authorities for help, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. In February 2005, Lillian died of a heart attack, leaving Gaspipe devastated. Casso's health deteriorated in prison, with diagnoses of heart disease, cancer, hypertension, and respiratory issues. In March 2020, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, he was transferred to a Tucson jail and later a hospital after testing positive. Despite his attorney's compassionate release requests, he remained incarcerated. On December 15, 2020, Anthony Gaspipe Casso passed away at 78. If you've been captivated by this deep dive into the infamous life of Anthony Gaspipe Casso, there's so much more to uncover about the shadowy underworld of organized crime. Hit subscribe to Inside's secret world of Mafia Titans for gripping stories, exclusive insights, and untold truths about the most powerful figures in Mafia history. Don't miss out. Join our community of true crime enthusiasts today.